Welcome back to Hornthrowers. We're joined by Joe from the Irish speed metal titans Gama Bomb. And I'm Rob, this is Olivia, and we're just gonna sit down for maybe like an hour or so and just chat about the new album, thrash metal, and just hopefully have some, good time.
We thought we'd kick it off with a bit of a silly question.
Yep.
If Snowy died in a fireworks accident, how is he now a vampire?
Yeah,
Is that like a new...
it's one of these things that I think we just purposely were like, yeah, I don't really care about the continuity of this. Originally, I think the idea was he was going to be a mummy for a while, and then I don't know what happened to him. This all happens in the laboratory underneath Philly's house, so couldn't come.
Is he like a mad Frankenstein?
Yeah, pretty much. I think every single mascot in the world wants to be Eddie. So, he's at some stage probably going to get a lobotomy and the works,
Awesome, because I can remember the last time we saw you kind of Snowy came on stage and said some pretty naughty things that got him booed by the crowd, and kind of using him for kind of comedic effect like that as well.
Yeah, for some reason he seems to be an ardent Brexiteer, so that's probably living on the south coast of England.
Well, when we saw you, he was ardently defending Prince Andrew.
Yeah, there you go. What parties he's been attending.
But then also, because I've got the T-shirt from during COVID where it's got a cab on it and he's holding that guy's head from the invaded Congress. So there's a funny story about that, but I'll get to later. But it seems like Snowy's playing both sides, so whoever wins, he's going to be sitting comfortably.
I think, again, it's part of the mascot kind of thing. It's like Vic Rattlehead always seems to be very happy that there's a nuclear explosion happening behind him, Most other people would be slightly worried about that.
Yeah, so kind of one of the first questions I wanted to ask is, you guys were obviously one of the bands that were kind of at the forefront of that kind of thrash revival that happened in the sort of early 2000s, 2010s. What was it kind of like back then? Because I was a teenager and a fan of all bands like yourselves, Evil, Bonded by Blood, all those ones that were coming out. What was it like possibly trying to kind of push forward as a new band playing what some people might have at the time considered a dead genre?
Yeah, we started a little bit before that in about 2002. And all the bands we were playing with were punk bands like GBH and Poison Idea and Gangrene and stuff like that. And then, as you said, around kind of 2006 or so, there started to be a lot more interest. And actually, a lot of the credit really has to go to Earache Records because, they signed a whole bunch of these bands within a year or two and they put us all out on tour and stuff. But yeah, we certainly, we had made a record kind of independently around 2005. And we would, we saw bands like Evil getting signed to Earache, and we were like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if that happened to us? And we just gigged really hard around the UK for about a year, and eventually we got onto their radar. But it was a cool time because whenever we were growing up, a lot of those bands like Exodus and Testament, they weren't really, I remember seeing Exodus with about 10 people there in Leeds in about 2002. So there was a long time where thrash was kind of not very well thought of,
Yeah, I know Exodus played. We're from Wrexham, North Wales, and they played here, didn't they?
Yeah, I went to that. Thankfully, that one was around 2010, something like that. That's kind of after there'd been a bit of a resurgence in interest, and it wasn't a big venue, but it was at least a sold out gig, and it was pretty sick. There were no barriers as well, so you just had like Gary Holt just in your face.
I used to go to university in Preston, so anytime I went to a gig anywhere, I would always have to get the night train, and you always ended up in Wrexham, kind of, because that was a big train station. So I've been to Wrexham station at 4 a.m. a lot of times.
Wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, ours is the opposite because we go to Manchester or Liverpool, so it's coming back late at night once all the trains have stopped, and you get some of the freaks at Chester.
I mean, we're sort of in the radio station right now, kind of it's the first time we've sort of been here after dark by ourselves, and the town's usually sort of swarming with interesting characters, so we've both got
yeah, these, in case someone goes through the back.
I thought I heard someone downstairs, so just had to kind of come downstairs hello.
Okay, well, don't get too paranoid or smoke any weed, guys.
Yeah.
Bumps in the night.
Yeah, so if the line suddenly goes dead, please send help. So like the new album, like Bats, like obviously I know you've got like the song like Bats in Your Hair, which is on that. Why was that kind of considered the main theme you were going to go for with the album when like looking at the tracks? Because I literally just only listened to the whole album for the first time this morning. Like, you know, like there's such a variety of like topics and themes on the album. Why was it that kind of like bats and vampires that kind of you honed in on?
I think that there was like a buzz earlier on where we said maybe the theme of this could kind of be like a old Hammer horror movie, you know, from the 60s. So I kind of guess that sort of jumped out originally, and we had originally talked about calling it Egyptron or something kind of like that, you know. But yeah, we just really liked the idea of bats in your hair. We thought it was kind of funny and stupid, and that kind of ticks all the boxes for us usually, you know. But yeah, I don't think there's any like it's weird concept albums or you know having a super theme. It generally only really goes a couple of songs deep, and then there starts being songs about you know whatever other topics come to mind, you know.
Well, I know it's the same on the last album with like the sea theme, and then you've got like Miami Super Cop, and it's like it goes,
Yeah.
it loses the sea theme pretty quick,
But you know, I think that's probably the last thing people want is to hear 12 songs of you know Gama Bomb doing sea shanties and stuff like that. You know, so as long I think we have to keep on writing songs the way that we always have, where you know we'll just pick weird movies or something that we find entertaining.
Because that's like kind of quite an interesting one. Like lyrically, you guys like really interesting, like the wordplay that kind of comes across in the lyrics, but then also you guys will like rather than just referencing like John Carpenter films like a load of like 80s nostalgia, we also like start to hit on like some like political themes, like especially in the new album. I thought the song Don't Cut Your Hair was gonna be like a jab at bands like Metallica or something you're like 30 years on or something, but it actually ended up being about something quite relatable about like friends you've got in the metal scene that maybe have fallen down these like alt-right rabbit holes and stuff like that, which I've definitely experienced with some friends and being like, oh shit, like you used to be like really cool and now you're a complete nut job. Like, is that like
Yeah,
based on like a personal experience as well?
I guess we all like you know, as you said, you probably hit the nail on the head there. There's so many of our mates and stuff who either you know, there's nothing wrong with getting your hair cut and you know changing the kind of style of your music you listen to, but there's so many people where I think that just being on the internet and stuff has like put them in a kind of a I don't know, just this super susceptible kind of like place where they can kind of just I don't know be influenced by anything that they see and then they'll just start regurgitating it online. So which kind of sucks. But like it's a weird one. There's a song on the album called Mask of Anarchy, and like all the lyrics for it were actually from like this poem by this
Percy
this poet.
Bysshe Shelley.
Yeah, exactly. Like and it, like it's so strange how all those like you know lines from the poem could be so relevant now, and they're exactly it's kind of about what's happening to us as a society right now, which is
Because
bad.
it was written in reaction to the Peterloo massacre, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was indeed. Yeah.
Because like I went through a really weird phase of getting really interested in like sort of romance poetry and things like that, like Shelley and Keats and stuff like that. Like when I was a really weird teenager.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I quite like that and picked up because you quoted the you know the whole like rise like lions from slumber and all that stuff. But that's kind of going back to what I was saying about the things that you draw from, like because like I could see quite easily how Gamma Bomb could get lumped into the kind of like pizza party thrash, like at first glance, but there's like definitely a lot more depth to what you do than maybe to some of the more kind of like you know fun times thrash bands.
Yeah, well, look, that's the old classic line. It takes a lot of intelligence to appear this stupid, look, you know. Like, I think it's you have to temper it. It's kind of like it's great to have some songs like that, but it's also good to have some songs that are just pure entertainment and stuff, you know. Because I think bands who can get very heavy-handed politically, you know, it can get very tiresome very quickly, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Like especially if you then decide to go storm the US Capitol or something.
Yeah, something like that.
I do think that Gama Bomb does have that nice blend though of like social commentary and like the fun. Like we always like me and my partner really like Iron Blood because like we had a hamster and we were like, oh, let's call this hamster Iron Blood. So every time that played, we were like, oh, look, it's the hamster. So, yeah.
It was based on the bad guy from the Action Man, like toys from back in the 80s. He was called Baron Ironblood, and like his like plot was just to take over the world. Like I don't know, that was one of those things where it was a toy that we used to play with a bunch when we were kids. And like whenever you look it up as an adult, like there was so little backstory written or research during. They were just like, he's just a general bad guy, you know? Like, okay.
Oh right, was that just that he was like labeled differently in Ireland? Because I think wasn't he like Doctor X or Professor X?
I don't know.
Or is it a different character entirely?
Different character. So I think it's whenever G.I. Joe was happening in America, they had a version of it called Action Force over here. And yeah, like he was the bad guy in that, who had like, you know, a vaguely fascist type uniform on or whatever. But that's the whole lyrics are kind of that, and there's a whole bunch in the middle. It's so weird. There's a movie by Mel Brooks called Blazing Saddles, and
Yeah.
like it must be in at least like 10 or 11 Gama Bomb songs, like, you know, and that bit has a whole bunch of lines from that movie in it, you know.
Yeah. Oh, half of which you probably don't want to quote on the podcast right now. Oh, have you got my notebook?
I couldn't think of another question.
Yeah,
I know what we're going to say. Yeah. We're going to say that you were saying about how everyone wants their mascot to be Eddie. We noticed, like, at the start of the album, it seemed like he'd been heavily listening to Power Slave, and that like Snowy was gonna just come out like dressed as a pharaoh or something.
It was actually weird. We had a big conversation about that, and we were like, you know, we didn't really know if it was going to be like slightly cultural appropriation-y, just to kind of like turn everything very Egypt-y, and I don't know. But yeah, no, we thought Bats was like a cool direction to go, and you know, considering that like the mascot, like he's only been around for a couple of records, so it's probably going to take a while for him to become a mummy or a robot or whatever, you know, 10 albums time.
I feel like he needs to get a metal arm or something at some point.
Yeah,
like some pouches, like a 90s comic book character, just like a random.
Yeah, like the Rob Liefeld, yeah,
a folder or something attached to him or something.
Yeah.
No, like
because I kind of thought the opening track, it was very Maiden in the guitars as well. I thought.
Yeah, used the similar kind of like Egyptian sounding scale to like songs like Power Slave and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was kind of intentional because like I think we'd been listening to actually some bands like Visigoth and stuff who were kind of doing like a modern-y kind of take on that. And yeah, we just really like the idea of doing something that was kind of like maybe a little like a kind of mix between Overkill and Iron Maiden kind of, and then obviously you know going off on a bizarre kind of tangent in the middle of the song as well, you know.
I mean, like,
yeah, I've only listened to the album once, but I know there was like an old school rap section, and I was like, yes, when this came on,
and there was like Scar influences on it and stuff like that, and it was just like, it's like the press release that we got when we got the advanced list and said it's your weirdest album yet, and I'm like, it absolutely is, but it really works.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, the guy, the Egyptian Lover, he was like one of the first rappers ever kind of in the United States back in the early 80s, and like, you know, load of whole people like Dr. Dre and all originally was in his like mixing crew back in the day. But anyway, like he kind of bizarrely, he is totally obsessed with Egypt and writes all his songs about Egypt. So like it was kind of no brainer. We were like, maybe we should call this guy, you know? And he was just like, yeah, cool. And I kind of fitted. We kind of thought it would have been weird if we had I don't know, like a modern rapper or a modern guest on a record. So we thought what would be more 80s than getting someone from the 80s, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned like Visigoth, because we had Jake from Visigoth recently on the show, and like, yeah, like they are one of those like throwback bands that are just like, I'm so hyped for the next album, especially like finding out that they're like, they kind of like have a similar thing to you where they're just like pulling from like 80s films and stuff like that in their lyrical themes and stuff, so it kind of makes sense you guys would vibe with them a lot.
Yeah, no, they're brilliant. Like I only really discovered them and a couple other bands like Sacred Rage and stuff. There are some really cool, interesting new bands kind of out there. But yeah, like we're always trying to find new stuff, because I guess we're kind of not the same as we were when we were 20 and listening to Exodus records all the time, or you know, I guess the older you get, the less replay value a lot of those albums end up having, you know. not to say that they're bad records or anything, of course. It's just like maybe whenever you were 20, you would have probably listened to a Metallica album 300 times a year, whereas maybe you only listen 3 or 4 times a year now, you know?
Yeah, I can't think of the last time I listened to Metallica. I listened to their new album, and I didn't really like it. I like the more trad stuff at the end, but I wasn't a big fan of the rest of it. I don't know why. I don't know.
I kind of got what they were trying to do, like to have like a more new wave of British heavy metal sound and kind of really going back to their influences, but it just didn't. I didn't find it particularly exciting.
Yeah, I think that's a fair enough cop, really. You know, the record before that, it took me a while to get into, and I ended up kind of liking quite a bit of it. But this one, like, I did listen to it for a couple of weeks, and yeah, I think they've the kind of same problem with Iron Maiden, because there's no one to tell them no or anything. All their songs are way too long, you know, like they really need to get someone to go in and edit them all and say, right, you don't need to do this big boring riff 20 times at the end, you know?
Yeah, it was like that with the newest Iron Maiden record as well. Where I was like, I saw the music video for, was it called like Writings on the Wall or something?
Yeah.
And I was like, this is amazing. Afterwards, I was like, is it just because Eddie showed up and there was all these callbacks to the old albums, like visually, and I was just a sucker for nostalgia for some reason.
Yeah, I think like that's kind of the thing, like where Maiden would have longer songs like back in the 80s, but there would be so much variation. It would be riffs upon riffs upon riffs. And now it's like, let's have 3 riffs and a solo that we play for like 8 or 9 minutes, and it's kind of like it doesn't have the substance to last that long.
The thing that annoys me very much about a lot of modern Iron Maiden stuff is that they'll come up with like a little guitar line, and that's what the singing's gonna go like. It's like do 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 do, and like it just goes the whole way through the song. But I don't know. Like, I suppose it's one of those things that you're always going to be comparing it to perfection, aren't you? You're always going to compare it to these amazing albums, so of course it doesn't seem as good, you know?
Yeah.
You say that, but then the new Judas Priest song that came out
Oh,
today or
slapped.
yesterday,
Yeah, like,
that was really, really good. But I don't know if that's because
there's a young
they've got
blood in the band.
they've got younger members in, they've got fresh ideas and stuff. So they're kind of like trying to put their own stamp on the band.
Yeah. I think they kind of seem to know as well that, you know, they'd made some records, kind of like the Loch Ness one or whatever it was, and, you know, the Ripper albums that hadn't gone particularly well. So they were very keen to get like the guys who produced, you know, British Steel and Screaming for Vengeance to come back to the band and help them really, you know, arrange the songs. And they sound brilliant. You know, I think it's amazing that Halford, as a guy that old, who actually looks like, you know, your granda now, can sing that.
I think he's the most wholesome man ever. Like every time he posts something on Instagram, I'm just like, please be okay. The day he dies is the day that I'm gonna not leave the house again.
I kind of love that he's just embraced the big Santa Claus beard now.
Yeah.
His autobiography is actually a really, really good read if you get a chance to read it. It's hilarious.
I had the audiobook, but it kept skipping every few seconds and it was just horrible to listen to. So
I gave it a read, and it was kind of like there was definitely bits that I wasn't expecting, especially his like weird little club he had with his mates in school and stuff like that.
All sort, and then going to, like, you know, all the like weird gay parties in Ibiza in the 80s and stuff, where he was like talking about Freddie Mercury and a bunch of
on the boat and stuff.
Brilliant, like, so cool.
And he was saying like how he's like sad because he wasn't out at the time, and then Freddie Mercury with like a bunch of like half naked guys just comes past him on the beach in like a massive yacht or something like that, having like a But yeah, like I'd highly recommend trying to give that another go. It's a good read.
And I wanted to listen to the audiobook because he narrates it, and like my family, like my grandparents are from Birmingham, so I found the accent really nice. Whereas a lot of people hate it. So like him reading it, I'm like,
I lived in Birmingham for a year, and I really like Brummies. They always seem very friendly, you know.
Yeah, I agree.
I think I have the same emotional reaction to like Geordies when you go to like the Northeast and stuff like that. It's like that's where a lot of my family's from, so I kind of just like hear the accent and like, oh, I'm home now.
To be fair, we did go up to the Northeast for a festival in May, and it was like
the best experience of it.
All the people were nice there. Whereas you go to gigs in Manchester and there's some arseholes. But that's not me slandering anyone in particular. I'm just
We're now cancelled in Manchester. Thanks. So yeah, just now that we've like kind of chatted a bit, have you got any idea what your 5 songs would be that you could potentially want to play on the radio this week, as like, you know, that have been maybe particularly influential for you, or just maybe your 5 songs if someone wanted to know what thrash was, you'd throw their way?
Well, like, I guess we can probably get a little bit of column A and column B. So like something like super influential for us whenever we were young would have been like Motorhead, you know, because that would have probably been the first, even before hearing Iron Maiden and stuff, seeing Motorhead on Top of the Pops and that kind of thing. So I would definitely probably pick a Motorhead song. Which one though? Like maybe Love Me Like a Reptile. It's a great one. But yeah, something like a Motorhead, that would be a good choice. Early Gama Bomb, big influence. Nuclear Assault, Radiation Sickness. They were like absolute heroes for us whenever we kind of started out. I would probably also put Sodom in there, Nuclear Winter. Like, we really loved the idea that like bands like Sodom and Nuclear Assault, they weren't like technically the best in the world, but they just kind of knew they wanted to be fast, you know. And then like probably something like Dio, you know, I would say We Rock, because whenever we made a few records, Philly actually ended up having surgery on his vocals because he didn't learn how to sing, and then we used to go and do like 200 show tours and stuff. So at the end of like the Terror Tape or Tales from the Grave and Space tour, he had vocal nodules on his voice, and he had to go and get them removed. And for about a year and a half after that, he couldn't do any sort of high pitched singing at all. So he really had to kind of change his approach in a lot of ways and started listening to a lot of stuff like Dio. So maybe, yeah, We Rock by Dio. And I think that's probably about 4. Let's give a shout out then to one of the newer bands like Sacral Rage. Their last record's great. So there's a song on it called The Glass. It's pretty good.
Sweet. I haven't checked them out, so like it'll be cool to listen to them.
They're kind of like a mix between like Rush and Annihilator. So they are.
That's a pretty cool mix.
I mean, Rush are one of my favorite bands, so you sold me already. But it's interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned the change to Philly's vocal approach, because like, I don't know, we spoke about Priest a lot. They were like, because obviously like he's been doing false acid the whole time, but there were like bits in like the chorus to like Bats in Your Hair that actually sounded like, you know, because like Rob Halford-esque. Like, I think like he's like over time his vibrato's actually like improved like massively. Like, which is usually it's the other way around.
Yeah, I guess again it was because whenever we started out, it was just a lot of really fast talking was kind of the way the singing went, and he had a high register, so he knew he could do screams. But like we would, you know, go and play a show and then go out drinking, and then at 3 o'clock in the morning he'd be like singing Tom Jones and wake up the next and not be able to talk, let alone sing, you know. So there were like a bunch of occasions in the past where I would have to like fill in for him singing on a gig and stuff. And I think it was just like kind of bad technique. And whenever he had the operation, as I said, he had to really start from zero. And over the last 4 or 5 years, as I said, his voice has just got so much stronger now, and he can do like kind of a whole bunch of stuff he could never have done before, and his high pitched stuff is even better now, you know.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, it's even on the new album, it's like massively shows. It's cool.
Yeah,
One
and like sorry.
Oh, sorry. Carry on. I'll keep
I was
my
just
question for next.
kind of lucky to have Philly because, you know, in thrash music you get so many kind of vocalists who tend to be in that kind of James Hetfield-y kind of just aggressive kind of, you know, over, and I think a lot of the time it doesn't really do the music justice, you know, because some of the best bands in the world, like everyone's kind of modeling it on the Stones or Aerosmith or, you know, back to those kind of singers, and Philly's really into that kind of stuff. Whereas, yeah, it's a pet peeve of mine. Some of my favorite bands from the UK, like Zentrix and Reanimator and stuff like that, like they all essentially are in the same kind of bucket of that somebody had to sing, so it had to be one of them, you know.
Billy being into the Rolling Stones kind of makes sense for his performance style as well. Now that you've said that.
Yeah, he'd be a big fan of that kind of stuff, and like the Cult and David Lee Roth and all that kind of stuff, you know.
I can see it with like the swagger on stage
Yeah,
and things like that.
I really
Like,
get that.
yeah.
What I was going to ask was, it's just coming to my head. Where did the cover of A Fashion Fall from Grace with God idea
Oh,
come
yeah, the
from?
Pogues cover.
Yeah.
We haven't like really done, like, I think we've done one cover in our entire existence up until then, and Philly like we would sing Pogue songs in the back of the van, you know, when we're drunk and things like that, and I think it was just something that around the last record, maybe before then, I was doing some demos, and I said, what about doing this Pogue song? And I like did a quick instrumental demo of kind of how it would sound as like a punk song or whatever, and it just kind of sat there for a bunch of time, and eventually I think Philly had been on Twitter messaging Spider Stacy, and he just happened to send him the demo, and he said, yeah, if you want to do this as a proper track, I'm on for it, you know. So we're like, boom, okay, I definitely would love to do that.
Yeah, it came out of nowhere, and it was like definitely a collaboration. I don't think anyone was expecting, but
No, it's pretty cool. And I've just realised as well, Snowy's in a coffin surrounded by beers on the
yeah, on the cover for the single.
so
Yeah,
a bit of foreshadowing there.
Premonition. All is dead.
Now I want to look back and see if there's any
yeah,
fireworks in there.
But yeah, I think that was just something where, again, same thing as Egyptian Lover. As much as like it would be cool to go and do a song with someone from Exodus or Testament and stuff like that, they're kind of like 10 a penny these days. And like, I don't really know if they're probably people are doing them for marketing reasons rather than kind of doing it for the right reasons. So we kind of wanted just to do that or the Egyptian Lover thing because we thought, you know, it kind of suited the song, you know.
Yeah,
that's really cool because I used to get annoyed because I really like hip hop, and when people would say, "Oh, I don't like hip hop because X pop song has X crap like feature on it," I'm like, "Yeah, but like those people are doing that for money. Like if you listen to their actual songs, like with Kendrick Lamar, if you listen to a feature that he's done on a song, he might not be into that. Whereas you listen to his own albums, like To Pimp a Butterfly, and the whole story behind it, it's like, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. I think it was just I like the idea of features in songs actually suiting the song and not just being like, marketing, as you said.
Yeah, and it's the thing. If the person's adding something, like obviously, if you got, you know, another thrash metal vocalist in that maybe possibly does something that Philly could very easily do on the track and stuff, what are you actually adding with that collaboration?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, like thrash is such a small kind of world as it is, really. You're better off trying to open it up and trying to see if you can get some people who are interested in other kinds of music and stuff to do it, you know. But like it's weird, like as I said, we'd never really done any guest appearances on any of our records now, and it's like two buses come at once, you know.
So is it like a conscious effort then to make this a more experimental album, or was it just like a case of what you were listening to at the time, or like, yeah, was it just you wanting to expose like thrash fans to something outside their wheelhouse?
Probably not so much that. I guess like some of it was because there had been a couple of songs on Sea Savage, or even maybe the last few records, there'd always been one song appearing on the album that was kind of mid-paced, and like we were kind of enjoying writing them. But then for this record, I think that there was probably more of a conscious effort to do stuff that would suit Philly's voice better, you know, because we kind of were saying it's kind of stupid looking at it from the point of view of saying, oh, should we include 2 or 3 kind of mid-tempo songs when, like, even a lot of the bands that we were kind of growing up with, like Municipal Waste and stuff, they probably had a lot more mid-tempo songs than we have now. But yeah, like we really did try very, very hard with this record to make sure that the choruses and stuff were as like big and catchy as humanly possible. And we knew that half the record was going to just be full of extremely fast songs anyway. It's kind of hard sometimes to tell because we're so close to it. We think that it's like this crazy radical departure, whereas most people would be like, it sounds a little bit more like Judas Priest, but it basically sounds the same, you know?
I think that's a good thing though, that it's you're able to change but still keep like the core identity of the band going.
Yeah, for sure. Like it was like there were like some moments on this album that like, and I mean this as a compliment, but I just laughed out loud, like because like it just like completely took me off guard.
Yeah, and like we do want to try and elicit a response from people where it's gonna like make them happy, you know. This isn't like it is the opposite. And like something that I very much struggled with heavy metal music is I don't really like doomy or depressing sounding metal, like, you know. Like I guess Candlemass is probably the slowest and most depressing I get, really. But yeah,
It's
I don't
pretty
know,
slow
like
and depressing.
but you guys probably listen to a much wider variety of metal than I do, like, you know. And I think it's great whenever people can look at us and see it as like the kind of the flip side of dark, or like, you know, Bathory or something like that, where it's not supposed to be taken super seriously unless you want to take it seriously, you know.
Oh, I think black metal's like one of the goofiest genres in the world. Like I absolutely love it, but like there are definitely fans that take it way too seriously, but it's
I just like how
so silly.
people that like black metal as this super satanic evil thing, and you just got a mortal just standing there on the hilltop in the Mighty Raven Dark video, just looking super silly. Like,
Well, it's supposed to kind of be tongue in cheek, like when you look back at like Venom and stuff like that. Like they were taking the piss when they were like, you know, doing the whole.
I think though that a lot of the people who in the black metal community who are super into Venom choose to ignore the, you know, that Venom were like, listen, that was a bit of a marketing gimmick and stuff like that. And like I have one of my friends, Alan from Primordial, like he's super into that, but he's also kind of super into Dokken and Cinderella and stuff like that. So he understands that, like, at the end of the day, it's just music. It's not an actual force of darkness.
Yeah, which I think anyone that's like kind of subjected themselves to enough black metal, you'd hope can't come out of it at the end of it with like actually seriously believe it, continuing to have the beliefs they had when they were 16 years old and first discovered like Burzum and stuff like that. You'd hope anyway.
yeah.
It kind of is perfect music though for when you're 16. Like it's kind of like when I was 16, I was listening to Ugly Kid Joe, you know, and it seemed like the coolest thing ever because there was like swearing and stuff in it, like, you know. But like, yeah, I can see like now where if I was 16 and saw all these guys like with loads of nails, I'd be like, wow, cool, like, you know, they have skulls.
Well, when I was 16, I was listening to like deathcore and all that, and then well, because I used to get people like saying to me, "Oh, you don't like real metal," and I'm like, I literally like loads of thrash bands, and I hang out with people that listen to deathcore and stuff like that. So
yeah, and you get horrible. You'd get like horrible metal elitists that would kick you out of trees.
Like you, that's how we met. The first time we met, you kicked me out of a tree.
It's weird though, isn't it? Like I think the older you get, the less, like when we were young, it was so important being all like, no, it can't be this way because, you know, that is fake and, you know, all that. Whereas the older you get and you kind of spend more time listening to ABBA, you're like, you know what?
Yeah.
There's room to listen to absolutely everything, or don't listen to it, but like don't be shitting on people because of what they listen to, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Like it's something like I thankfully massively grown out of. And I think now I just find I think if somebody was to like bring up the whole like poser thing now, I'd just kind of like laugh in their face. Whereas 16 years of age, you know, I would be like, "You're a poser, you don't know this band," and all that.
Whenever we for one of the first tours we did for Eric, they had like a thing where they were like, yeah, like it's like bring metal records that you regret buying to the gig and we'll stamp on them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Was a whole bunch of bands that Eric had signed in the early 2000s that they didn't get on with, and they were like, let's smash a bunch of their CDs, like, you know. And like at the time we were kind of like, this kind of seems stupid because I bet you in 10 years they'll be like smashing our CDs here instead, you know.
Wait, were they CDs that ERA had printed? So instead of selling them, they just decided to destroy them.
Yeah.
Not very smart.
Especially when you're probably thinking like Eric's roster from yesteryear had like Bolt Thrower and things like that are probably rare collector's items now.
I feel like this was probably later on.
It was kind of like, you know, whatever kind of stuff like Biomechanical or whatever that they had signed around the mid 2000s, you know, before they kind of hitched onto the thrash wave. But you know, like we ended up having like massive legal woes with Eric and stuff like that, and you know, with hindsight, obviously, whenever the one flavor goes in, then another one goes out, and I think that's what happened with a lot of the thrash bands, kind of around 2013-14. You know, whenever a lot of the other labels said, "Listen, this isn't working," so you know, a lot of the bands like Bonded by Blood and stuff kind of just sort of stopped in their tracks there. You know.
Well, I think that's weird because like I've noticed like the roster of like Eric artists now is like very much not what it was, and it's not that it's like they've kind of lost all interest in metal now. Like it's kind of like more like, I think they've got bands like Rival Sons and things like that on it that are like kind of Zeppelin-y, kind of like kind of throwback stuff there. Like it's really weird that this label that like pioneered like grindcore and all this, like, it was like the cutting edge of like metal like way back when, is now very much not.
Well, I'm just surprised that bands had legal trouble with earache. It's not very well heard of, is it?
But like, I guess that even whenever we were there, 90% of their sales were coming from reissues of Napalm Death and Carcass records and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's what they were making so much money off those reissues. They were kind of like, why are we signing these new metal bands whenever we should probably just find some other genre of music to have a go at,
Yeah, I suppose it was just like it was a bizarre thing, because I remember it would always be like at festivals I'd seek out like the earache merch tent and stuff like that, because it's where I get all my thrash metal t-shirts or vinyls from and stuff like that, and it's very much not that anymore.
I think things have moved on, and we've obviously had ups and downs with them and stuff like that. Like you can't buy our CDs or records that we did with them anymore, but it's one of those things that like we wouldn't be where we are if they hadn't given us the break that they did, back then. But we are appreciative of that.
I suppose it is a double-edged sword like that, then, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to turn it into like the let's shit on her hour, something like that. It was more just something that I'd also noticed, like kind of over the years.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to say is, so you guys are going on tour soon. We're hopefully going to see you in Manchester on the 23rd. What is it like touring a new album, but the album's not out yet? Because it's not out till the 4th, is it?
It's kind of cool for us in the sense that we get to play some of the songs live and kind of gauge people's response. And probably the best advertisement for having a record out is being able to tell people an amassed room of people that you've got a record coming out. But like hopefully it's going to kind of like raise a bit more anticipation for it. We kind of originally were like, will we try and see if we can get vinyl for the tour, and see if we could pre-sell them on vinyl only or whatever. So we might do that. We'll see what happens.
Fingers crossed.
Oh no, I don't know if my bank account can take it.
It's fine.
But, it's great seeing like how much of a resurgence there's been in support for bands in terms of buying vinyl and stuff. Because I'm sure, as you guys would remember, 15 years ago, yeah, like there were a lot of people had record players, but I don't think it was the same kind of deal at all. It was so much harder and more expensive to make vinyl, and bands were getting less of a cut of it. Whereas now you kind of know if you're going to a show and buying a record from a band, they're probably going to make a couple of bucks out of it.
Yeah, for sure. Like I remember like being like 15 or something like that, and like the extent of collecting vinyl back then was like going through like dusty bins of old Iron Maiden records in like a secondhand shop and stuff like that. And now it is like pre-ordering, or you could even go into HMV and get like a death metal album you've been really waiting for or something like that. Like granted, pay through the nose for it, and it's like close to like 40 quid or something.
Yeah, I went to HMV and found like it's like a Dark Throne demo. I think it had just been released, and I found that for like 20 something quid in HMV.
Yeah, the last
mixed in with like new pop albums as well. So it's like pretty interesting.
I was kind of very lucky because I went to university in Preston in 2001, and it was kind of probably the nadir of the popularity of vinyl. And there was a big record shop there called Action Records, and I think I got like every single Anthrax album for £1. Same with like nearly like all the thrash albums, like Led Zeppelin albums were like £3. So it was very easy to amass a big, huge collection. Like, so whenever I see like stuff like Maiden albums being 25 quid now, I'm like, wow, I can't believe like these are like so expensive now, But like I think it's people really love vinyl, they love looking at the artwork in that kind of format.
And it's also having like that tactile thing in your hand, and one, it's a way of like supporting the band, appreciating the artwork on the blown up on the size that it should be, and it's just like a physical experience of listening to the music and stuff like that. That's pretty cool, and maybe in an age of streaming it's somewhat lost.
That's kind of made me think, I wish at the age of like 5-6 years old in 2001 I could have had the hindsight to go, I will get that Gallows End Candlemass finally for £1 instead of paying £40 for it in 2023. It's a first edition.
I think like I'm a big fan of streaming. I think as long as you have a decent stereo and you're listening to it properly, it's totally fine. Because at the end of the day, if you love a band, you're going to want to either see them live or buy a T-shirt or buy a record or something. So it's all more to do with goodwill towards bands. As you don't have to necessarily be buying a CD, as long as you're showing support from them in some other way. That like CD's $15, like a ticket for a gig is $15 or a T-shirt. So.
Yeah, I found with streaming services though, like I used to use Spotify all the time, but then I started using Bandcamp and I was like, why is the sound quality so much better?
Yeah, like
went to Apple Music and it's so much better. So I think streaming's good if you pick the right service.
Well, it was when we started to get like advanced listens for albums and stuff so that we could write reviews. I was like, why is the audio quality amazing here? But then I go to Spotify and like it's the same song, but
yeah.
And like it's something that if you have a really good stereo, you do kind of have to set it up. If you use Spotify, you're gonna have to try and set it up to try and get the best possible frequency out of it. It's Matt, the old guitar player from Evil, he does that for TVs. Like people who spend like thousands of bucks on their televisions, he goes and like properly calibrates it so you can see it in actual 4K and stuff.
Oh, fair. Because I read like a couple of years ago that he opened a cinema or something. Well, that was kind of like something that he was doing with his time, because it's kind of like a really like kind of bizarre story of like all leaves, Matt leaves, all comes back, and kind of like switch up vocal duties and stuff like that. And I still haven't seen Evil with all on vocals yet, so I don't quite know what to expect, because I don't think maybe the albums didn't excite me as much as maybe back when Matt was in the band. But again,
I've seen them a bunch of times now with all, and he does sound really kind of like Matt live. So like if you close your eyes, it kind of sounds exactly the same. I think whenever he like made the first record with him singing, there was a conscious effort to try and maybe sound a little different so that he could have a little bit of his own individuality. But I guess what happens with a lot of bands, and like I was saying, Bonded by Blood, same thing with Evil and stuff. Around the time, kind of around 2013, a lot of bands kind of realized that they weren't going to be making a living out of playing this kind of music. So they had to try and say, right, if you have kids or something, you need to start. I think it's just one of those situations where we were kind of lucky that ever since we were young, we always knew that the band was going to be kind of like our kind of hobby, and we were going to have real jobs and stuff as well. So we were able to keep on making records and like touring a lot less and stuff as people in the band had kids, but we were able to kind of keep our friendship and stuff together, which was like we kind of discovered that over lockdown and stuff, was that the most important thing about the band was us being friends, because if we were best buddies, then we could do anything, and if we were not best buddies, then everything was going to be difficult, so but like I really I would love to see Matt doing something on his own. Like last time I was talking to him, he said that he was going to make some music, so I would assume you'll probably hear some sort of kind of non-thrash kind of rock coming from him at some stage, hopefully,
Okay, that'd be really interesting, because like Evil were one of the bands that got me into thrash metal. So obviously, other than like Metallica and stuff like that, but they were the first sort of new thrash band that I was like, oh, this is still a thing. It's not just sort of dusty old like Megadeth albums and stuff.
Yeah, that album Enter the Grave, whenever it came out, it was literally like, I think that sort of was such a signpost of what was going to happen over the next like 4 or 5 years. Lots of bands being all like, wow, you can make an album that sounds like Master Puppets, which was brilliant. Like, and the fact that they went and recorded it in Sweden with Flemming Rasmussen and stuff like that, it was so cool, like,
Yeah, for sure. And that was like, because that was kind of like around the time, maybe like a couple of years after that was kind of the time where I was first getting into metal. So it was like a really exciting time, because it was the time that you were kind of describing when Eric had that large roster of thrash bands, and it was very much, having just discovered Metallica, blah blah blah, all this stuff, and then into a resurgent thrash scene. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, And like there were so many cool bands coming out from around then. Something I always kind of found weird was though that like in a lot of areas like England and American stuff, there was a lot of bands, but for some reason around then there wasn't a bunch of German bands. And the Germans had like such a strong scene in the 80s. It wasn't until later you started seeing bands like Dust Bolt and things like that.
Yeah, that is interesting. Like, yeah, I think like weirdly, the Teutonic sort of like ones were still carrying on strong when maybe like the big four were kind of waning and stuff like that. Like when thrash had its kind of like wilderness years, bands like Sodom and Destruction were still releasing like pretty solid albums.
Yeah, and like there were some bands like Annihilator and Overkill and stuff who they kind of did the same as the German bands were doing. They were just like playing 60 shows in Germany a year, and that was kind of really it for most of the 90s. And like again, we had like a very illuminating conversation with Tankard when we were like young guys, and they were like always heroes of ours. And they kind of said, listen, you can either go and do this on weekends and have fun, or if you want to do it the other way, you have to do like 200 shows a year, and you have to then try and figure out, right, so best case scenario, you might only be making like 10 or 15,000 bucks a year. So like it is kind of sad that like metal music for the most part has now stopped being able to offer people the idea that you could go and make a total living doing it. But one of the good things about that kind of is that people are kind of doing it for the right reason now. People are doing it because they love it instead of doing it for maybe in the 80s. There were a lot of, especially in hair metal bands who kind of seemed to just be there to try and make money or, get laid or whatever. Whereas that's not a concern really in the new wave of thrash metal, is it?
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting though, because I always see people commenting like, if you see like a Metallica video, there's a comment going, I was born in 2003. I wish they'd made music like this these days. And it's like, there's loads of decent metal, like, well, really good metal that comes out these days. It's just you've got to look for it. When you find it, there's an abundance of it.
You find it by tuning into Hornthrowers every Thursday night on Callan FM
at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
It is so important, that kind of thing, though, what you guys are doing though, because if you think about it, like whenever we were growing up, the only music you had access to was physical music that you could hear through a friend or buy or whatever. Whereas now, like people who have like Spotify or YouTube, they have access to absolutely everything. So it's not exactly the same journey whenever you first heard like a Machine Head record and then you were bought the next one or waited for the next one to come out a few years later. People have total access immediately, so they're able to chart the ups and downs of a band really quickly, and it can be really hard for people to kind of know, like they're like, yeah, I only listened to these couple of albums by Overkill and they didn't sound good, whereas maybe they missed out on classic ones. But there's no guide. You have all this information, but you've no one there to tell you what's worth listening to.
Well, I remember when I was growing up, we used to watch like Kerrang and Scuzz, and they'd show like music videos all the time, and it would be like you'd get stuff like Guns N' Roses and Nirvana, but then they'd play like Machine Head and like all the new metal stuff, and like Enter Sandman would play every 10 minutes, and it's like that would be a good gateway. But I don't know if that exists anymore. I don't watch TV, but then I don't know if I'm just now because I'm older.
Yep.
I don't really care what teenagers think.
It's so strange as well, isn't it? Because as you get older, the way that you consume music changes. To whatever suits you at that particular time, and like maybe, if you had young kids, you'd be listening to it in some different way or whatever. But yeah, like I have all my vinyl and stuff downstairs. I don't really listen to it, but I assume by the time I'm 60, I'll be listening to it again, because I think everything comes in circles like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I find it weird that new metal's become a thing again now. Like everyone's listening to Deftones, and I'm like, they're one of my favorite bands. And I'm like, why is like these videos on Instagram just got a Deftones song?
Well, it's more the resurgence in popularity of Limp Bizkit that's baffling me. But
well, I saw a thing where Fred Durst was saying he stopped like selling merch and he stopped like advertising himself. He's just like just playing shows and seeing who turns up, and it's loads of young people. So.
There was a thing in about 2012, right, where Machine Head were playing on the main stage at Download Festival, and Limp Bizkit were on after them. And like Rob Flynn was all like, "Oh, we're not gonna play if we have to go on before Limp Bizkit because they're shit and no one likes them or whatever." Like, right? And then the festival were like, "No, that's you obviously are not with the times." And they were like, "Right, okay." I went and did the gig anyway, and they said that like there was like whatever the same amount that would have been at the main stage for the headliner were there to see Limp Bizkit. So I think that there's a whole generation of people where that kind of music like really, really resonates. Like, what do you call that? A emo band from 2006-ish again. Is My Chemical Romance, is it? They played a
Yeah.
gig in Ireland there about 3 or 4 months ago, or maybe it was last year, and I think there was like 25,000 people at it.
Yeah, I'm a real big My Chemical Romance fan as well.
Yeah. You know what I mean? There's a bunch of bands out there like Limp Bizkit or that, or like even looking at, say, it Rammstein or Tool playing these gigantic shows. There's a lot of like sort of music from that era that really has like stuck with people, like,
Yeah, but that's the thing as well with like the metal elitism. I do think there are good new metal bands. Then I wouldn't really say Deftones are new metal.
I
say
think they
post
just
metal.
happened at the same time as new metal and got lumped
Yeah.
into it, but yeah.
Yep. And you can say the same with thrash. There's a whole bunch of bands like Metal Church and stuff where they're not really a thrash band, but they were just kind of popular around the same time, so they get lumped in the same way. But as you were saying though, I think that what it really is now is this kind of, when we were kind of growing up, it was a lot of 80s nostalgia, and now that's moved into like late 90s and early 2000s nostalgia, like,
It's weird. It's a weird feeling having like people nostalgic for your childhood.
Yeah.
It's like it's not a nice feeling. Like I saw like a comment like on, I'm hoping it was a joke, but it was like a screenshot comment that got shared on Facebook, and it was like on like a Papa Roach video being like, "I wish I could have been a kid back then," like when the music was pure or whatever. And I was like, okay, you do
and this,
you.
like, everyone's like, your relationship with music is so like symbiotic with what you were doing at the time, so like that's like, I don't like Papa Roach because of that, because at that stage I was like, into my, hardcore metal and all this kind of stuff. Whereas like, if I had been a few years younger, then that would have been probably my entry into listening to that kind of music, so
Yeah.
the same way that I have a soft spot for stuff like Ugly Kid Joe, because whenever I was 10, that was considered the new thing, like,
Yeah, I think everybody's got like those kind of like bands that were their like little entryway that is still like maybe a guilty pleasure for them today.
Yep, totally.
I don't think I have guilty pleasures with music though. Well, maybe I do actually. There was some bands me and Heather listened to the other day, and it was like, what was it? Was it Attack? And I was like, I remember these being funny, and they were being good, but it was actually funny. And one of the comments was, "How is the same guy playing every instrument? Because each member of the band looked exactly the same, like the same black skinny jeans, black t-shirt, and hairstyle." And it was, yeah, that was garbage. But then there's decent stuff as well. So
fair enough.
Yeah, no shame.
I'm not shaming you.
No, I'm saying people just need no shame when it comes to music.
Yeah, that is it. And like, it's as much as like kind of as much as like people, it's hard to accept people being all like, wow, this band that you clearly think is totally ridiculous or awful. I've like the only sort of time I do kind of shame people or get on my goat is whenever, if someone has like been like kind of outed as like a sexist or a racist or something like that, and you tend to have people who are just going around listening to them as if that didn't happen, So like, I try and sort of pick up on that whenever I can,
Yeah,
we're
I'd take like
huge black metal fans.
I take a pretty hard stance on the sketch thing, because I'm like, an example being is Solstice. Like,
oh, that happened.
This
recently.
thing's just happened where they're just being really like transphobic and going about all these weird stuff. And I'm like, as a trans person, I don't want to. Well, why would I listen to your band when you hate me? Is my thing. So I got a pretty hard line on it.
It was like even weirder than when you got into it. Like, they recruited neo-Nazis into the band recently who were in like Destroyer 666, and then he was also like peddling all this like pandemic, COVID was a hoax stuff as well at the same time.
You know what? Like, you get a lot of, it's kind of weird. Like, I kind of know some of the guys in Destroyer 666, and I wouldn't, like, the guys that I know, I wouldn't describe them as Nazis or anything. And you do get like a lot of kind of like, COVID-y, like, paranoia and stuff like that associated with that scene as well. But like, I think at the end of the day, like, you can only really sort of look at it and say, listen, I take some things more seriously than you, and you take some things way more seriously than me. Like, I think you just have to take all that stuff with a pinch of salt, unfortunately,
Yeah, I don't know as well how much of them are like trying to be edgy for edgy's sake.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a bit like, you're not like 15, you're an adult.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, that's it. Like, they are 15 and an adult, at the same time. Like, or a 50-year-old who's 15.
Yeah.
They have to do taxes and they start having a big tantrum and kicking car doors in and stuff. And
Punching the drywall.
yeah, that's pretty
It's
funny.
weird, like, because I would say this: the reason why people don't listen to Gary Glitter's music is because it's shit. It's not because he's like a pedo.
That's
The
my
reason
thing with
why
David Bowie.
people listen to Michael Jackson's music is because it's good, So
Yeah.
somewhere within everyone, there's an ability to separate the art from the artist. Like, we might
I
live to
think-
see where people are hanging about talking about how brilliant the Lost Prophets and stuff are, while we'll be like, what? I don't understand,
I mean, like, my kind of like take on it is like, you can separate art from artists, but I think you do need to, it's okay to be critical of the things you like and to kind of still be aware and kind of point out the negative and shitty things those artists have done. Like,
Yep.
and you're still going to have like an emotional reaction to that music you grew up with, and because it's in your DNA at that point, but you can still acknowledge that the person who made it was a piece of shit.
Yeah, and like, there's been so many ones for me where it's just been so difficult with, like, really being a big Megadeth fan and stuff like that. I don't know. I guess it's just one of those things that, like, the older you get, the more you're gonna see that kind of thing, like, because these people that you like held up on a pedestal actually, or maybe shouldn't have been on a pedestal in the first place,
I remember like listening to like Dystopia, the Megadeth album when it came out the first time, and like the opening riff was like really good, and I was like, oh wow, Megadeth are back. And then he started singing, and it was like comparing like immigrants to vultures and things like that in the lyrics, and I was like, oh dear.
Yeah, and like, that's because I guess what they're really like with I think the line's like, no controlling who comes in the door and the stuff like that.
The
We're like,
vultures have come home to roost or whatever.
Yeah, like, I think he's sort of just trying to be like, there's a whole bunch of people that are gonna read into this, like Donald Trump won, like, so there's half the country are gonna think this is cool, like,
Yeah.
When you get that a bunch, like, it's like Leonard Skinner, whenever they were around, they had a song back in the 70s called 30th or Saturday Night Special, and it was an anti-handgun song about people bringing guns out to bars and getting shot and stuff like that. But anyway, like, they all kind of, well, a load of them died in a plane crash, and then the rest of them died over the years. And then in about 2012, they had a song called, or an album called, like, Gods, Guns, and Government, or From My Cold Dead Hand, where, because they were all a bunch of different old guys now, they were all real pro-gun, like, so you just get that people change their point of view over years. And I don't know, like, maybe you guys have parents, like, I think honestly you can see it in parents and stuff, you get a little bit more conservative the older and older they get,
I've had that experience, but we'll leave it at that.
I'm gonna keep quiet.
Well, on one half, my mum's still pretty
cool.
Yeah, but yeah, it's weird though with Megadeth, because like you have all these like anti-war songs, and then I don't necessarily know if he's not. Maybe he's pro-war. Maybe he wants.
No, I think he comes down on that kind of like libertarian, like reactionary, right wing, weird, don't tread on me kind of thing. Like, I think that's what I kind of gleaned from his lyrics and statements he's made over the years.
He was very famously banned from Northern Ireland for 5 years back in the 80s for saying stupid stuff on stage and inciting riots and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, just like where he like got on stage and thought it'd be a great idea to say like give Ireland back to the Irish, like in like Belfast or something like that.
And all this kind of stuff. And like, yeah, it's just one of those things where you're like, well, I guess if you're going to be taking heroin all the time, you're probably going to make silly choices.
What did Joe Biden say recently when he came to Ireland?
I can't remember. I know when he became I know when he became president, he refused to speak to the BBC because he was like, "I'm Irish." Like,
Yeah. This is insane, right? Okay. My great grandfather and his great grandmother were brother and sister. There you go.
really?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's
So the 2 times he's been to Ireland, he's come to visit the little village beside where we're kind of from or whatever. I didn't get to meet him or anything like that. And be all like, "You suck." So that's my dubious claim to fame.
Maybe now you could use that and just go, "I'm distantly related to you, so give me some of that White House money."
Yeah. Give us some
Yeah.
visas so we can go on tour in America. It's like, I think the visa process alone is like $10,000 or something like that. It's just gets so difficult, like kind of for smaller bands, whereas I think if you're a band like where you can pull 1,000 people or something like Creator, it's much easier to do, but like for bands like us or Evil or any of those kind of bands, it's just like such a crazy outlay of money to put in to doing something like that.
How's like Brexit affected you guys touring Europe and things like that? Because I know like visa costs like through the roof now and stuff.
Yeah, well, like luckily we're from Ireland, so we have Irish passports, like we can go wherever we want in Europe and the UK really without any sort of hindrance. So that's the kind of good side of, like, there's no good side of Brexit, but like from our point of view, the good side of it is that we don't have to do visas to go into anywhere really, because Northern Ireland is technically part of the EU and part of the UK at the minute.
I forgot about that because I think isn't it still people in like Republic of Ireland as well can like also sort of freely travel to the UK because it's something to do with like treaties and whatnot.
Yeah, pretty much. Like you don't really like if you just go to the airport, you don't need a passport to fly to Dublin or Belfast, right? You can just fly on your driving license or whatever.
Oh, pretty cool.
It's very
So
interesting.
you're most welcome. Come over at some stage and have a beer. We'll put you up and
sick.
sit around.
Well, might take you up on that.
Yeah, because I've got like family from Ireland as well. Because I know well,
I don't know whether I want to say on the podcast.
oh, just like so
about my Irish heritage.
Your Irish heritage.
Yeah.
I don't know about mine.
Oh, so
because my paternal grandparents are like Brummies, and then my maternal grandparents, one of them is from the US and the other one is like from Ireland, and like there's my grandma's like grandparents, both of them are from Ireland, so they're all there, and it's like my mum's just got loads of stories and stuff. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that.
Nah, well, I guess that's
go.
There's always been like a whole bunch of of that kind of stuff here. There's a massive amount of like inspiration for like ghost stories and all that. So that'll probably be something that we will do at some stage, kind of try and make an album that's like all specifically about like Irish horror stories or ghost stories or something like that, without any fiddles on it.
But then, does that mean we'll become like a horror band if you do it right the next album?
Is that something you're resistant to, like kind of having like sort of traditional Irish musical elements in the band?
Probably
like fiddles. Yeah.
Yeah. Just because like we kind of really, even though like it seems like we're being all experimental, like we've always been like no keyboards, no down tuning, no clean guitar bits, and we've never actually broken any of those 3 rules since we started the band. So we're doing okay for 23 years in or whatever, like, or 20 years in rather. But yeah, so I think that's like I do like traditional music a lot. I can't really say that I particularly am a massive fan of stuff like Waylander or like traditional music, and I don't think like crunchy guitars and tin whistles sound particularly good together. Like Gary Moore.
I used to really hate folk metal, and then you like it. My partner likes it. And I've just had it forced on me, and I'm like, okay, I can admit some of this is good.
I may or may not be attempting to put like little tin whistle bits into a black metal project at the moment.
You know what though? Like I think as long as people and being all like, this is a fucking laugh. This is about like Vikings and drinking beer out of horns and roaring and stuff like that. That's great. Like, but again, like everything in heavy metal, you get people who take it way too seriously and stuff like that. Like and end up getting super opinionated, and that's the kind of thing. Like I wouldn't really mind, like if like again, I have a lot of friends in the black metal and sort of folk metal world and stuff like that. But there's a whole bunch of them who would be very much like, we don't listen to anything that isn't very, very sad,
All I can think of now is, what was that? There's a black metal project from Wales, and there's like a hook in it. Like the main hook is like played on a recorder really badly, but I think it slaps, and I play it all the time. Well, I used to play all the time. And I remember what it was called.
I can't remember what they're called. Like I sent them to you, and then we were like,
I'm gonna need to find them after this.
And we were like, they're called like Anwen or something like that, and they're like, it's really bad, but like the
recorder version of the Jurassic Park theme song. Do you remember it?
I do remember. But
it was like that over black metal. But the thing was, I couldn't stop listening to it.
Yeah, it's like if that was a demo and then they'd gone and recorded it properly and had like someone that can actually play the record or whatever it was, it might have sounded sick.
Take the Motorhead song out of my playlist and please replace it with this song because I want to hear it.
I mean, we can just throw it in anyway if you want. Sweet. We'll send you a link when the show's up so you can experience it for yourself.
Yeah.
Get some information for our upcoming weird album, no doubt.
So it's been about an hour, so I think we'll call it there. Do you have anything to promote? Obviously, there's the tour and the album.
Yeah, and we're being busy bees and stuff as well. So we'll definitely be coming back and doing some more English gigs probably next year, and we've got like most of the next album sort of, we're working on that, so it'll probably be out in 2025 as well. So
oh wow,
you are
busy.
The same announcements from Gama Bomb.
That seemed far away, but then I realized it's November 2023, and I'm like,
where's your life going?
Where's my life going? But I'm not afraid to hit 30, but you are, and you're a lot closer than I am.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me.
I just hit 41 there a couple of weeks ago, so being 30 is fine. So it is.
Okay, give me a little bit.
I feel ancient at 27 now.
Oh, I think it's just that thing of not being in my 20s anymore. That's the kind of seems like a bit of a weird thing to have on the horizon.
Well, it's one of those things when you're like, I'm not young anymore, and you're like, well, I don't look young anymore either. So the clue was in the mirror there, I think.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been fun.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much, and we'll definitely get Philly on next time and see you in Manchester for a few beers.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you soon.